Another week in the books as the buyers and sellers become more crystallized. Let's see how the power rankings have shaken out after week 16. We start at the bottom as always. Two teams still in perpetual darkness, the Sharks and the Blackhawks. These two teams all but eliminated. Not much really to say about them. Above them in their own special tier, once again, the Predators, just pathetic. They've actually been playing well over the last month or so, actually looking like a competent team, which if they'd been playing that way all season would still be a massive disappointment given where expectations were at the beginning of the year. But hey, I guess take your small victories where you can, Nashville. You aren't used to that. Just above them, separate from the bad tier that we always have, we have a new terrible tier with just three teams: the Anaheim Ducks, Buffalo Sabres, and the team that had the worst week of them all, the Pittsburgh Penguins. This team went on a road trip but played three teams that they should absolutely beat in Anaheim, Seattle, and San Jose, the lowly Sharks. They lost every single one of them. The Penguins are now officially one of the worst teams in the East. Their playoff chances are all but gone. A fire sale is imminent. I already discussed this in a video a few months back. In my opinion, this is a blow it all up situation. Trade everybody, that includes Sid, or in my opinion, you're just going to be right back in this position next year. Above them in the bad tier, four teams: the Utah Hockey Club, floundering St. Louis Blues, Philadelphia Flyers, and Seattle Kraken. The Blues have been largely uninteresting and uncompetitive all year. This last week, they lost three games that honestly nobody expected them to win, but it's disappointing because this team is like a barnacle on the side of the playoff race. They're still hanging around somehow, but they clearly are not doing anything to get there. They're falling further out of it. They're just meandering and middling through this season, and they need to take a step back and change their process this offseason. The Jim Montgomery hiring gave them a boost, but that has clearly worn off. Above them, two teams who actually had pretty good weeks are among the aggressively mid teams. That includes the Canadiens, Canucks, Red Wings, Islanders, Rangers, and Bruins. The Red Wings were one of those teams that had a really good week last week. Lost to Philly in OT, not good, but they beat the Canadiens, who are in their tier, and then also the Lightning and the Kings, who are above them on this tier list, so that's very impressive. Detroit right now is back above 500 and technically in the playoff hunt. Do I think that they're going to make it in? Absolutely not, because their goaltending is not great and their 5v5 analytics are underwater, but at least now they're playing well enough that they might sucker ownership into believing that Stevie Y deserves another year with Todd McClellan, and that'll turn things around. Spoiler alert, it will not. As for the Islanders, a team that has basically been the Walking Dead for the entire season, they had a good week. Only two games, but they beat Philly and then Carolina in overtime, a very impressive win on their part. The Islanders are hovering around 500, but I don't expect them to make it into the playoffs. They're kind of in the same situation as St. Louis, in my opinion, kind of meandering through this season. They don't really have a plan going forward. I think they're going to end up being sellers at the deadline and probably having to turn the page on a new era. Now, above that mid-tier, we have two teams who are absolute enigmas, starting with the Columbus Blue Jackets. I put them in Jekyll and Hyde because I didn't realize this until I looked at the standings today. The difference between Columbus at home and the road is like, it's incomprehensible that this is the same team. They're so far underwater on the road and they're incredible at home. The standings say that the Columbus Blue Jackets are in the playoff race. The analytics say that they are absolutely nowhere near one of the better teams in the league. So I have no idea if this team is going to flame out or make the playoffs and go on a deep run somehow. Last week against a tough schedule, beat Toronto, beat LA, got waxed by the Carolina Hurricanes. Very par for the course. If there wasn't already a Chaos Goblin team, I would name the Blue Jackets that, but that spot still belongs to the Calgary Flames, who had a fairly normal week last week. They beat Buffalo, they beat Minnesota, lost to Winnipeg. Pretty expected for them. They're definitely creeping into the upper echelons of the tier list, but for right now, I'm still just a little bit wary of them. One tier above them, a bunch of teams who I think are good, not great. I'm not going to get too deep into any of them. The Kings, Wild, Senators, Devils, Lightning, Panthers. I think all of these teams have been at the top of the tier list at some points, especially the Devils, Wild, and Panthers, but they've hit a bit of a lull in the middle of the season. I don't know if they're going to rebound to it or if this is just kind of a plateau after a high peak early on, but I think all these teams should be respected going into the playoffs. Above them, though, we have three contenders, including the Avalanche, Maple Leafs, and Hurricanes. The Maple Leafs actually had a pretty bad week, losing games to Columbus and Ottawa, but they're getting healthy. I'm not too worried about them going forward. And then we have the elite tier with just four teams: Vegas, Winnipeg, Washington, and Dallas. Winnipeg had the best week out of anybody, beating some quality opponents in Colorado and Calgary, and doing so quite handily at that. I don't know if the Winnipeg Jets are back to being the wagon that they were at the very start of the year, but they are definitely trending in the right direction. If they can get hot at the right time around the playoffs, they're going to be a scary team to play, especially with Hellebuck. And then last but not least, one team above them all, the Edmonton Oilers. They're not at the top of the standings, but for my money, this is the team that everybody needs to be gunning for when the playoffs come. They had the best player in the world, and it seems like they are finally starting to find their final form.